Hey guys, tonight we settle into a place where the wind slices across an endless white prairie, and your breath turns into small clouds before your eyes. You're standing outside a cone of buffalo hide stretched tight over tall poles, and the cold air is already biting at your cheeks. The ground crunches under your feet with a brittle frost that sounds louder than it should in the stillness. You probably won't survive this without some help. Inside, a faint orange glow wavers, promising warmth, but how can that be, in the middle of this frozen expanse? You step forward, imagining the warmth wrapping around you like a secret kept for generations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lift the flap of the tipi and duck inside. The first thing that greets you is the smell, a mingling of smoke, earth, and the rich tang of cured hides. The air is warm, not in the way of a modern radiator's steady hum, but in waves, like the breath of some sleeping creature. The fire sits in the center, its flames low and steady, radiating a heat that feels impossibly gentle compared to the bitter cold outside. The light dances up the curved walls, making shadows sway as if the lodge itself is alive. A mainstream historical fact slips in here without you even realizing it. Plains, tribes, like the Lakota, Blackfoot, and Crow, had perfected this design over centuries, creating portable, all-season homes that could withstand both blistering summers and sub-zero winters. This wasn't accidental. It was engineering born of necessity, tested over countless migrations and storms. Your hands, still cold from outside, stretch toward the fire. You can feel the temperature gradient, your palms warming, but the top of your head staying cool under the smoke hole above. That hole, by the way, is no careless gap. It's placed with careful thought, allowing smoke to escape without bleeding away all the heat. The wind direction determines which flap is lowered, and tonight it's angled to the northwest, blocking the icy gusts you felt outside. A quirky tidbit comes to mind as you take in the scene. Some tribes used snow itself as an ally, packing drifts around the base of the tipi to block drafts. It sounds counterintuitive, using frozen water to keep warm, but the snow acted like a natural windproof wall, sealing in the lower warmth much like modern insulation. Historians still argue whether the Tipis shape evolved primarily for aerodynamics against wind or for ease of dismantling during migrations. You lean toward the first theory right now, watching the structure shed the prairie gusts like water off a duck's back. The people inside move slowly, speaking in low voices. One person adjusts a hide draped over the entrance, securing it tight to stop a sly breeze. Another tosses a few small sticks onto the fire, not enough to flare, just enough to feed its heart. It's not about chasing heat like we do with thermostats. It's about sustaining comfort, balancing fuel against effort, warmth against smoke. You sit cross-legged on a buffalo hide, its thickness a cushion against the frozen ground. The hide still smells faintly of the animal's life, a reminder that warmth here is not an abstract concept. It is the gift of another creature. The cold on your cheeks is already fading. You notice how your body feels heavier, as if the tension of bracing against the wind outside is melting away. The night beyond the tipi walls is vast and unbroken, but in here you are enclosed in a pocket of survival knowledge, so refined it feels like magic. The fire's light ripples over faces, showing a mix of calm, watchfulness, and unspoken trust in this structure's design. You realize that for those who grew up here, this is not just a shelter, it's a perfectly tuned machine for living, one that holds back the full force of winter with nothing but poles, hides, and human ingenuity. In the stillness, you hear the soft hiss of snowflakes brushing against the outer walls. Somewhere outside, the wind moans over the prairie grass. But inside, you are warm enough to unfasten your mittens and lay them beside you. That, in itself, feels miraculous. You think about how you'd survive a night like this without these people, their craft, and their centuries-old methods. The answer is simple: you wouldn't. You run your fingers over the inner wall of the tipi, where the thick buffalo hides overlap. Each panel is heavy, dense with winter fur, stitched with sinew so tight you can barely see the seams. The hides are not just a barrier, they are the beating heart of the tipi's insulation. Without them, this whole place would be nothing more than a frame for the wind to mock. The texture under your hand is rough in some spots, softer in others, as though the animal's life still lingers in the grain. Buffalo were not merely food to these tribes, they were the supply store, the fabric shop, and the hardware store, all rolled into one shaggy package. One mainstream historical fact worth noting is that a single mature buffalo could yield enough hide for the covering of an entire small tipi, and its thickness made it ideal for keeping out winter's bite. In fact, winter hides, with their long fur and dense undercoat, were far superior to summer hides for this very reason. A gust rattles the entrance flap, and you feel the way the hides respond, not stiffly like a wooden wall, but flexibly, bending and shifting so the wind loses its bite before it ever reaches you. The seams overlap like shingles on a roof, channeling any moisture down and away. In deep cold, extra hides can be draped over the original cover, layering warmth much like you might pile blankets on a bed. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some families decorated their hides with painted symbols, not just for beauty but to tell stories or signal which family lived there. Imagine modern insulation printed with your life history, far more stylish than fiberglass batting in pink or yellow. Historians still argue whether the practice of layering hides for winter was universal among all plains tribes, or more common among those who hunted extensively in buffalo-rich regions. You tend to think it must have varied. Resources are never evenly distributed, and people adapt to what they have. Your eyes trace the way the hide covering is lashed to the poles with rawhide thongs. These thongs shrink when dried, pulling everything even tighter, like nature's version of adjustable ratchet straps. The hides themselves are smoked to make them water-resistant, a process that also discourages rot. You can smell a faint tang of that smoke when you lean close, a scent that says weatherproof, without any need for chemical sprays. Someone across the fire from you is mending a seam, the bone needle gliding through hide as if it were cloth. The stitch is so small and neat it could almost vanish. You realize the maintenance of these covers is as crucial as the initial crafting. A tear left unattended could be a frozen draft by nightfall. The warmth inside is not stifling, it's steady, even, a kind of comfort that wraps around you like a thick sweater. You start to understand that the insulation is not just about trapping heat from the fire, but about creating a stable microclimate inside, where the temperature changes slowly, giving your body a chance to adjust. Outside, you know the temperature has plummeted since sunset. The prairie doesn't mess around. Cold here is a predator, always testing the edges of your shelter for a weakness. But the hides are holding, the seams are tight, and the fire is doing its quiet work. You pull your own robe tighter and think of how different your modern life is. If you're cold, you just nudge a thermostat. Here, warmth is a relationship. You have to tend it, feed it, protect it. You glance at the hides again, appreciating not just their function but the labor behind them. The hunt, the skinning, the scraping, the curing, the sewing. It's not insulation you buy, it's insulation you earn. As you lie back against the furs, you imagine the snow piling higher outside, pressing against the lower edges of the tipi. Instead of fear, there's reassurance. Each flake adds a little more protection. Inside, the hides breathe slowly, flexing in the wind, alive in their own way. You crouch closer to the center of the tipi, the heat from the fire brushing against your cheeks like a friendly hand. The flames dance in that mesmerizing way they do when the logs have burned down to glowing coals, steady and confident rather than wild and greedy. Here, at the very heart of the space, is the key to surviving the night. The central fire pit, dug slightly into the earth, ringed with stones that hold the heat long after the flames die. You notice how everyone keeps a respectful distance, not out of fear, but because the fire's role is more than just warmth. It is the invisible anchor of the whole interior climate. A mainstream historical fact slips into your awareness. The conical shape of the tipi actually helps circulate warm air. Hot air from the fire rises, meets the sloping hides, and gently rolls back down, creating a convection effect that keeps heat moving instead of letting it drift uselessly out the top. But that smoke hole, oh, it's clever. You glance up at it now, noticing the two flaps tied to poles that can be adjusted from inside. Tonight, they're angled so that the smoke slides out with the wind rather than being pushed back down. Too wide an opening, and you'd lose your precious heat. Too small, and you'd choke on smoke. It's a delicate balance, and one you realize is constantly monitored without anyone making a fuss. A quirky tidbit you might enjoy. Some accounts suggest that children were taught early on how to read the smoke. If the column rose straight and thin, it meant the vent was just right. If it swirled or flattened, adjustments were needed. Imagine growing up with smoke as your first weather app. Historians still argue whether this central fire design was influenced by earlier housing styles from other indigenous groups, or if it was an independent innovation born solely of the plains environment. You lean toward thinking it was a bit of both after all. Ideas travel, but necessity has a way of shaping them to fit the local world. The fire itself burns clean, fueled mostly by dry wood, gathered from riverbanks or carried in from sheltered spots. You notice how small the logs are. No one is throwing giant tree trunks on here. Smaller pieces burn hotter, faster, and produce less smoke, which keeps the air clear and the warmth more even. It's almost as though the fire is breathing in sync with the people around it. At the edges of the tipi, in the shadows, you spot bundles of kindling and stacked logs ready for the next tending. You realize that the fire never gets to rest completely during these cold months. Even at night, when people are sleeping, someone will wake to feed it. The rhythm of warmth is continuous, a quiet vigil that keeps the cold from creeping in. You think about your own modern heating, set it and forget it. Here, heat is alive, requiring touch, awareness, and patience. In a way, it's a companion, and its crackle is as much a part of the night as the wind outside. A bit of smoke curls past you, carrying that earthy, almost sweet scent of burning willow. It clings faintly to your clothes and hair, the way it must cling to every hide and robe here. It's a scent that says safety, not inconvenience. You breathe it in, and it settles in your chest like reassurance. The fire's glow paints the faces around you in copper and shadow. Someone stirs a pot hung above the flames, the scent of stew mixing with the warmth, doubling the comfort in the space. You catch yourself smiling. The cold is still out there, merciless and unchanging. But here in the circle of light, it feels like a different world entirely. You step outside for just a moment, curiosity pulling you toward the edge of camp. The cold hits instantly sharp, biting, the kind of cold that seems to slice through layers before you've even taken 2 breaths. Your eyelashes catch tiny crystals of frost. Out here, you notice something you hadn't before. The tipis are not scattered randomly. They're nestled in a gentle hollow in the prairie, shielded on 2 sides by low rises and a stand of leafless cottonwoods. It's not an accident. One mainstream historical fact is that many plains tribes chose their winter camp locations with an eye for wind protection, water access, and proximity to fuel. The hollow breaks the worst of the gusts, while the cottonwoods signal a nearby water source even in winter. Knowing where to find water matters. You crunch across the snow toward the outermost tipis, the wind picking up around the edges. Then it fades again as you step back into the hollow. It's like walking through an invisible wall. You realize that this placement is as much a survival tactic as the hides themselves. The tipi design works beautifully, but put it in the wrong spot, and the cold will find a way in. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts. Some oral histories mention elders who could hear the wind and predict where it would strike hardest. They'd walk the land in silence before a move, then point to the exact spot for the camp. It wasn't guesswork, it was a kind of living meteorology, tuned to subtle shifts in air and sound. Historians still argue whether this site selection knowledge came from centuries of cumulative trial and error, or whether certain individuals specialized in it, like proto-weather scouts. You're inclined to believe it was both a collective memory sharpened by a few particularly gifted listeners. You look at how the tipis are arranged openings facing roughly east, away from the prevailing winter winds. The spacing leaves just enough room for walking paths, but keeps the structures close enough to share some windbreak effect. Even the outermost ones benefit from their neighbors' shelter. Returning toward the center of camp, you notice that some tipis are set against snowbanks deliberately shaped and patted smooth. Those snowbanks act as additional barriers, deflecting the wind upward and over the camp instead of letting it roar through. The hollow itself is quiet compared to the surrounding plain. Without the roar of wind in your ears, you hear other things. A kettle lid rattling inside a lodge, a dog shifting in the snow, distant laughter from children not yet called in for the night. It's a calmness you didn't realize was missing until you stepped out of it. Back inside, the shift is dramatic warmth, firelight, voices. You think of your own life, how often you leave climate control entirely to machines. Here, even geography is part of the heating system. The land itself is chosen to lend a hand in keeping you alive. You settle again by the fire, your cheeks tingling from the quick trip outside. Now you understand that warmth in a teepee isn't just what happens inside. It begins out there, with knowing where to stand against the wind, how to let the land do some of the work for you. You lean back onto the thick layer beneath you, realizing it's more than just a place to sit, it's the very mattress of survival. The bedding here isn't some flimsy pad. It's a deliberate construction, stacked with care. Closest to the ground is a base layer of woven mats or reed screens, keeping the hides above from direct contact with the frozen earth. On top of that rests a generous spread of buffalo and deer hides, fur side up, their softness an unexpected luxury in this stark environment. One mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Archaeological and ethnographic studies show that plains tribes often used multiple layers of bedding not only for comfort, but to create a buffer between their bodies and the conductive chill of the ground. Heat escapes downward just as easily as upward, and without a proper base, even a roaring fire can't keep you warm through the night. You press your palm into the hides and feel the trapped air within the fur, a natural insulation system no modern foam could match. The fur springs back when you lift your hand, ready to catch and hold more warmth. Each hide is positioned with intention, some for softness, some for sheer thickness. A quirky tidbit sneaks in. There are stories of prized winter hides, so luxurious that guests were offered them as a sign of honor, the same way you might hand someone your best blanket. Sometimes, the most decorative hides painted with patterns or adorned with beadwork were part of the bedding, both functional and a display of skill. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements in Tipis were standardized or varied widely between tribes and families. Was there always a specific side for elders, a corner for supplies, a spot for guests? The truth likely shifts with the storyteller, but you can see a certain rhythm to this space family gathered in arcs around the fire, bedding forming a continuous ring broken only by the doorway. As you lower yourself fully onto the bedding, you notice how the hides smell faintly of smoke and earth, a scent that seems to deepen the sense of safety. It's not the artificial fresh linen scent you might be used to, but something grounding, almost ancestral. The bedding is more than warmth. It's also a way to manage the body's relationship with the fire. Too close and you roast, too far and you freeze. The bedding ring forms a natural thermostat. Those nearest to the flames get more heat, while those farther away nestle deeper into their layers. A child stirs in their sleep nearby, pulling a fur up over their head. The firelight flickers across their bundled shape, making them look like part of the bedding itself. You smile, realizing that here warmth comes from the sum of many small efforts, the hides, the mats, the fire, the people all layered together. You shift slightly, and the furs wrap around you with a sigh. Outside, the wind can howl as it pleases. Down here, close to the ground but never touching it, you're part of a system perfected by generations who learned that in winter, the difference between living and freezing could be as thin as the layer you slept on. You pull the edge of a heavy sleeping robe over your shoulders, the weight settling around you like a protective animal. It isn't a thin cloth or some scratchy wool. This is a thick, well-tanned hide, lined with soft fur, cut in a way that wraps you from chin to ankle. The feeling is immediate. You can sense your own heat bouncing back against your skin. These robes are not an afterthought. They're the personal climate control system of the Tipis winter nights. It's worth noting that explorers and traders in the 18th and 19th centuries often wrote about these robes with envy. They remarked on how a single buffalo hide covering, fur inward, could hold as much warmth as several layers of European blankets. This was no accident. The hides used for winter robes were carefully chosen, often from animals taken late in the season when their coats were at their thickest. The tanning process left the leather supple yet strong, allowing it to drape without stiff folds that might let cold air sneak in. You run your hand over the robe's surface. The outer leather is smooth and smoke-darkened, the inner fur deep enough to bury your fingers in. There's a faint scent of the outdoors in it, wind, grass, and the ghost of campfires past. You think of how modern sleeping bags are rated for temperature. Here, the rating is in the thickness of the fur and the skill of the tanning. One curious piece of lore says that some winter robes were so valued they were passed down through generations, mended and softened with use, until they became almost legendary within the family. Traders might offer high prices for them, but they were rarely sold. You can imagine why, on a night when the temperature drops far below freezing, giving one away could mean gambling with someone's survival. There's an ongoing discussion among anthropologists about whether these robes were primarily for sleeping or if they doubled as all-day wear in deep winter. You suspect both were true, depending on the cold and the task at hand. After all, stepping out to fetch water or check on the horses before dawn would be far more bearable if you could keep your cocoon of warmth with you. Around you, others are settling in under their own robes. A woman near the fire tucks hers under her feet, ensuring no drafts creep in from below. Across the space, a man folds his in half before wrapping it, creating a double layer over his chest and back. You see how each person has their own method, small personal rituals learned over years of cold seasons. The fire in the center is lower now, glowing more than burning, and you realize that the robe is doing most of the work. Your breath is warm against the fur near your face, and you feel a pocket of heat forming around your head and shoulders. It's a kind of microclimate, one you can carry with you when you roll over or shift position. There's a quiet to this moment, broken only by the occasional pop from the fire, or the muffled sound of snow falling against the hide walls. You feel the robe mold itself to your shape, responding to your movements as if it were alive. The heaviness is comforting. It presses away the thought of the cold outside, creating a barrier as much psychological as physical. In the corner, a child stirs, mumbling softly, and their mother leans over to pull the robe more snugly around them. The child sighs and goes still again. You're struck by how these coverings are not just tools, but part of an unspoken language of care within the Tipi. To cover someone well is to say, without words, you are safe here. The robe's weight seems to deepen your breathing, slow your thoughts, and nudge you toward the edges of sleep. The air in the Tipi is still warm enough, but you know if the fire went out, you'd still have a fighting chance against the prairie's night chill. You close your eyes, letting the fur hold you in its quiet embrace, thinking of all the winters it has weathered before you. The soft crackle of wood brings you halfway out of sleep. It's not a loud sound, more like the whisper of a page turning, but in a winter Tipi, even small noises matter. Someone is up, moving carefully, tending the fire while the rest of the camp lies cocooned in robes and hides. The figure moves like a shadow, crouching near the hearth, adding just enough fuel to coax the coals back to a steady glow. Accounts from early observers often describe this nighttime duty as an unspoken rotation. No schedule pinned to a wall, no verbal announcements, just an understanding among those in the lodge that warmth is everyone's responsibility. A light sleeper might stir once or twice in the night to check the flames. Another might wake naturally when the air feels cooler and quietly rise to add kindling. You watch the fire tender place thin sticks first, letting them catch without smoke, then a thicker log to burn slowly. The trick here is balance. Too much wood, and the teepee gets smoky or uncomfortably hot. Too little, and the chill seeps in. The person's movements are practiced, almost ritualistic, shaped by years of repetition. There's an interesting note from ethnographers who recorded Tipi life in the late 19th century. Some families kept a small cache of perfectly dry wood, specifically for the midnight tending, often stored in a bundle wrapped in hide to protect it from dampness. That way, no one had to venture outside in the freezing dark to fetch more fuel. Specialists in indigenous architecture have debated whether the act of night fire tending was more about maintaining temperature or about preserving embers for the next morning. From where you're sitting, wrapped in your robe, it's clear both are true. A tipi that wakes to glowing embers can be warm again in minutes, without the struggle of rekindling from scratch. The firelight changes the whole mood of the space. Faces half hidden in furs take on a golden softness. Shadows move gently over the walls, their shapes lengthening and curling with the flicker of the flames. You can almost feel the room breathe, inhale with the heat, exhale with the cooling air. The fire tender sits back for a moment, holding their hands close, letting the warmth soak in before returning to their own place. The tipi settles again into quiet. Outside, the wind moves restlessly through the trees, but in here, the calm is deep and steady. You think about how in your world, most heat comes from machines you rarely see, from systems that hum behind walls or under floors. Here, warmth is visible, audible, and responsive to touch. Keeping it alive means being part of a chain of awareness, where one person's care benefits everyone else. As you drift again towards sleep, you realize that the small act of adding a log in the middle of the night is more than just a chore. It's a silent agreement, a thread of trust that ties the people in this lodge together against the cold pressing in from all sides. And tonight, that thread is holding firm. You wake to a faint creak above your head. At first, you think it's the poles shifting in the wind, but then you notice a pair of hands reaching upward toward the top of the tipi. A young man, still wrapped in a thick winter shirt, is adjusting the smoke flaps with a long pole. His movements are slow, deliberate, the tip of the stick nudging the rope ties to change the angle of the flaps. The opening at the peak is small tonight, but not so tight that smoke hangs heavy inside. In this cold, you can't just leave it wide open, the warm air would rush out in a heartbeat. But close it too much, and the air becomes sharp with wood smoke, stinging eyes and throats. The solution lies in constant, precise adjustments. You realize this is like steering a ship through shifting winds, tiny changes that keep the whole vessel safe. Travelers in the 19th century often marveled at this skill, noting how members of the household would change the flap position several times a day, and even at night if the wind shifted. It wasn't an idle habit. It was the only way to keep the environment inside balanced between breathable and warm. There's a detail many overlook. The flap poles aren't fixed. They're long, flexible, and light enough to be moved from the inside without dismantling anything. In the dark of night, a person could shift them by touch alone, guided only by the feel of the wind pushing against the hide. It's a kind of weather sense you don't pick up overnight. It's learned, passed down, and practiced until it becomes instinct. Some historians have debated whether every tipi dweller knew how to manage the flaps, or if certain family members specialized in it. Watching now, you suspect everyone learned the basics, but those with sharper instincts became the unofficial flap masters. The way this young man works, you can tell he's done it hundreds of times. As the flap tilts just so, you notice an immediate change. The air near your face feels warmer, the smoke column rising straighter before slipping away into the night. The adjustment is minor, but in a place where survival hangs on degrees of temperature, it matters. He lowers the pole and rests it against the wall, moving without a sound back to his bedding. Around you, the other sleepers haven't stirred. They trust the quiet work of someone who knows what they're doing. It's a trust you've begun to understand here. Warmth and safety are shared responsibilities, and everyone's comfort depends on the attentiveness of others. From outside, the wind's howl fades to a gentler murmur, blocked by the careful positioning of hides and flaps. You lie back down, pulling your robe tighter, feeling the difference in the air now that the vent is set perfectly. It's a reminder that in this world, there's no set and forget button for comfort. You adjust, adapt, and stay alert, even in the middle of the night. The fire, now burning low, casts a faint amber light on the hide walls, and a thin stream of smoke flows up and out as cleanly as if it were following a drawn line. You realize that for centuries, this skill, something you might overlook, has been as vital as knowing how to light the fire in the first place. It's not a decoration, not a minor convenience. It's survival, disguised as a small, graceful gesture toward the ceiling. When you shift your position on the bedding, your palm brushes something solid tucked just beneath the hides. Curious, you lift a corner and discover a smooth, dark stone still radiating a gentle heat. It's not hot enough to burn, but it's noticeably warmer than the air around it. Someone must have placed it there earlier, fresh from the fire, to give off warmth through the night. The practice is older than the tipi itself. Plains families, especially during the harshest months, would heat stones in the fire pit until they held the heat deep in their cores. Then, using tongs or folded hides, they'd carry them to where people would sleep. Sometimes they'd tuck them under layers of bedding. Other times they'd set them in shallow pits near where feet would rest. The heat would seep out slowly, taking the edge off the night chill and keeping muscles from stiffening in the cold. This method works because certain types of stone like basalt or granite hold heat for hours once warmed through. Field stones gathered from riverbeds or sunny ridges made excellent candidates. You run your fingertips over the surface, noting how the warmth feels different from that of the fire, steadier, less intense, and with no smoke to irritate the lungs. There's a story told among some elders about children curling themselves around these stones like small animals, the stones wrapped in scraps of fur to prevent burns. In the morning, the stones would be cold again, ready to be returned to the fire for reheating. You imagine the quiet routine, warming them at sunset, placing them carefully, then retrieving them at dawn for another day's cycle. Some archaeologists have pointed out the difficulty in tracing this practice in the historical record. Stones leave little behind once they're just stones again, and the act of using them was so everyday that it rarely made it into written accounts by outsiders. Yet, for those who lived through countless winters here, the habit was as essential as keeping the fire lit. You replace the hide and feel the stone's heat reach back into your hands, a comfort so small and humble it's almost invisible. But in the unforgiving cold, invisible comforts can mean the difference between rest and waking every hour shivering. The fire, in the center of the teepee, still glows softly, but you realize that its warmth doesn't quite reach every corner equally. These heated stones bridge the gap, creating little islands of comfort away from the flames. The air may cool by the walls, but the ground beneath you holds a quiet reservoir of heat. You glance across the lodge and spot another stone, wrapped loosely in a piece of tanned leather, resting near a sleeping child's knees. The parent closest to them stirs, checking the position with a practiced hand before pulling the covering snug again. It's an instinctive gesture, done without opening their eyes fully, as natural as tucking a quilt tighter in a modern bedroom. The thought settles in. Here, technology doesn't have to mean machines and wires. It can be as simple as knowing which stones will hold the day's fire into the small hours of the morning, or how to place them so they warm without scorching, or when to swap them out. Knowledge passed through generations can be as efficient as any modern gadget, especially when every piece of it comes from the land itself. You close your eyes again, feeling the faint thrum of stored heat seeping into your bones. The wind outside may scrape along the plains with icy claws, but here, warmth has found another way to endure quietly, steadily, under the weight of hides and the rhythm of centuries-old habits. When you settle back under your robe, you notice something about the way people are sleeping around you. It isn't scattered or haphazard, there's a pattern, almost like petals circling a flower. The fire in the center is the heart, and the sleepers are arranged in arcs radiating outward, their feet generally pointing toward the flames and their heads toward the teepee walls. This arrangement does more than make sense for space. By lying relatively close to one another, bodies share heat in subtle, invisible ways. You might not feel it instantly, but the combined warmth of several people in proximity creates a microclimate that softens the bite of the air, especially during the long hours between midnight and dawn. Historical accounts from traders and explorers sometimes noted this practice, though they often misunderstood it as simply crowding for lack of room. In truth, it was strategic spacing close enough to benefit from each other's heat, but far enough not to disrupt sleep. In severe cold, the gaps would shrink even further, with children placed between adults and elders kept in the warmest spots. You glance across the circle and see a pair of siblings sharing the same fur robe, their heads tucked under like two birds in a nest. Near them, an older man shifts slightly, pulling his coverings tighter, and the person beside him adjusts two small, unconscious movements that keep the circle intact. No one speaks, but the warmth moves between them all the same. There's a cultural layer here that outsiders often missed. Sleeping close isn't just about temperature, it's about trust. Sharing warmth means sharing vulnerability, and in a world without locks or walls, the people beside you in the night are also the ones you rely on most during the day. That silent bond is as protective as the hides above your head. Some anthropologists have raised questions about whether certain positions in the sleeping circle were reserved. Did leaders or hunters sleep closer to the fire, while others stayed near the outer edges? Evidence suggests it varied by tribe and circumstance, but there's little doubt that the placement of each person was considered with care. It wasn't a random sprawl, it was a living plan, adaptable to the night's cold and the household's needs. You adjust your own position slightly, feeling the shift in temperature as you edge nearer to another sleeper. It's subtle but real, the air is less sharp, your robe feels cozier, and your breathing deepens almost immediately. There's something profoundly human in this shared warmth, a reminder that long before central heating, survival depended on closeness. In the flicker of the firelight, you catch the gleam of eyes half open across from you. The person blinks slowly, then closes them again, their breathing evening out. It's a rhythm you start to notice all around, a collective tide of slow inhales and exhales, sinking without anyone trying. The Tipi hums with that quiet life, a shared pulse under the sound of the wind outside. It makes you think about modern life, where the idea of sleeping so close to others feels foreign or even uncomfortable. Here, it's second nature. Privacy bends to practicality, and comfort grows from connection rather than distance. You realize that in this space, the warmth in the air isn't just from the fire or the hides, it's from the people themselves, each one a small, steady hearth in the cold prairie night. By the time morning light begins to seep through the hide walls, you're starting to notice a difference in the tipi's covering. The hides feel denser, almost heavier, than the ones you saw during the summer months. When you run your hand along the inside, you can feel the thickness of the winter pelt's longer fur on the outside, with a deep undercoat that traps pockets of air. Travel journals from the fur trade era often described how tribes swapped tipi coverings seasonally. In warmer months, they used hides that had been scraped thin, sometimes even partially hairless, allowing for more ventilation. But when the cold season arrived, the summer skins were taken down, stored, and replaced with thick winter hides. This wasn't just a luxury, it was an essential adjustment, like changing the tires on a wagon before traveling into deep snow. The process of switching covers wasn't as simple as lifting one set off and tossing another on. Families would check every seam, every lash point, and sometimes even add extra reinforcement where the wind was likely to press hardest. Some hides would be doubled at the lower edge, where cold air tried most to creep in. The labor was considerable, but skipping it could mean the difference between a tolerable night and frostbite. There's a detail here you can't miss. The hides are not just heavier, they're also treated differently for winter. A smoke curing process deepens their resistance to moisture and helps prevent stiffening in freezing weather. The smoke darkens the leather to a rich, earthy brown and leaves behind that distinct scent you've been breathing in since you arrived. Anthropologists who've studied these coverings often remark that the winter hides were sometimes so thick that a single panel might take 2 or 3 people to lift into place. Watching the way they're lashed to the poles, you can see why it takes alignment, patience, and strength to get each section hung perfectly without sagging or leaving gaps. A story shared by elders describes how children would help during this seasonal change, holding rawhide thongs in their small hands, or standing on tiptoe to pass tools upward. It wasn't just a chore, it was a family event, one that signaled the turning of the year. The smell of fresh hides and wood smoke together meant winter was here, and the lodge would soon be ready for its longest test. The hides you're looking at now are clearly in their prime, thick, supple, with fur that still has a faint sheen in the firelight. They're as much armor as shelter, turning the Tipi into a warm capsule against the open prairie's merciless wind. You imagine the months of preparation that go into ensuring the right hides are ready, knowing they will spend the entire winter stretched over these poles. When the wind outside picks up, the winter hides respond with a muted drum-like sound. Low, solid, and reassuring. No sharp flapping, no rips at the seams. Just a quiet reminder that the lodge is holding steady, doing exactly what it was built to do. You settle back into your place by the fire, feeling the difference in the air. The winter hides not only block the wind, they also deepen the quiet. It's as though the world outside has been pushed several feet further away, giving everyone inside the gift of stillness along with warmth. Later in the day, after the fire has been fed and the morning chores are finished, you notice something unusual about where a few people are sitting. They're not on the floor at all, they're perched slightly higher, on what looks like a broad, low platform built from wood and packed earth, covered in hides. When you step closer, you can feel the difference in temperature immediately. The air just a foot or two above the frozen ground is noticeably warmer, and the cold that seeps upward from the earth doesn't touch your feet. Ethnographers who documented winter camp life often noted these raised sleeping and sitting areas, though they varied from one community to another. Some were simple, just a layer of brush or poles laid over stones. Others were more elaborate, with solid frames and multiple layers of insulation on top. The purpose was straightforward: stay off the ground, and you stay warmer. In sub-zero weather, the earth acts like a vast cold reservoir, draining heat from anything in direct contact with it. The platforms here appear to have been built into the inner circle of the tipi, keeping the sleepers close to the fire while giving them an elevated perch above the coldest air. They also make it easier to store belongings underneath bundles of wood, extra hides. Even baskets of food are tucked in the shadowed space below, where the air is cooler but still protected from freezing solid. There's a clever detail to the design. The hides covering the platform hang slightly over the edges, trapping air underneath and preventing drafts from curling upward. When you sit down, the surface feels firm but cushioned, and the furs hold the warmth from your body almost instantly. Some oral histories mention that older members of the household were given these raised spots first, both for warmth and ease. Getting up from the floor in cold weather can be stiff work, and the extra height made it less of a strain. Children sometimes slept there too, protected on all sides by adults who took the lower spaces. Archaeologists still discuss whether these raised beds were permanent features in every winter lodge, or used only in the harshest stretches of the season. It's easy to imagine them being set up as soon as the snow settled deep and dismantled again in spring, when the cold no longer bit through the floor. From your spot on the platform, the tipi feels subtly different. You can see the fire more clearly without leaning forward, and the air at face level feels fresher than the thin layer just above the ground. You also notice how smoke drifts slightly upward from the fire pit before thinning toward the vent, something that might be more irritating if you were lying at floor level. Below your feet, someone reaches under the platform to pull out a small bundle of dried herbs, tossing a pinch into the fire for scent. The warmth from the coals reaches you even here, but the platform keeps the creeping chill of the earth at bay. It's not a luxury, it's another layer of survival strategy, one you wouldn't appreciate fully until you spent a night without it. As the day dims toward evening, you slide back onto the hides and stretch out. The elevation makes you feel oddly secure, as if the cold has to climb a little further to reach you, and tonight, that might make all the difference. By the time evening settles in, the tipi feels warmer than usual. and it takes you a moment to realize why. The fire is going as always, but the air carries an extra depth of heat and a savory smell. Someone is cooking, and the warmth from the meal preparation has spread to every corner of the lodge. It's no coincidence. In winter, cooking was often timed to double as a heating boost. When a pot of stew or roasted meat sat over the central fire, the flames burned hotter and longer, and the heat radiated out to warm not only the food but everyone gathered inside. The moisture from simmering ingredients even softened the air, easing the dryness that comes with cold weather. You watch as a woman stirs a large pot suspended from a tripod above the flames. Steam curls upward, carrying the scent of bison meat, wild onions, and a hint of dried berries. Each time she leans in to check the pot, the fire responds with a brighter glow, throwing more warmth into the tipi. The space becomes a cocoon, warm, fragrant, and alive with quiet movement. Travelers' journals from centuries past sometimes remarked on how these cooking sessions seemed to pull the household together. People would gather closer to the fire, sharing conversation while waiting for the food, each body adding to the collective warmth. The act of eating was more than nourishment. It was an integral part of keeping the lodge heated during the coldest hours. Some researchers have debated whether cooking during the coldest part of the night was intentional for warmth or simply a matter of necessity. From the way the air feels right now, you'd guess both reasons played a part. Food warms the stomach, the fire warms the skin, and the togetherness warms the mind. The pot's surface ripples as it boils, and a ladle dips in to fill a wooden bowl. The steam is thick enough to blur the firelight for a moment before it dissipates. When you take a sip, the heat rushes through you in a way that blankets never could, spreading from your chest to your fingertips. You can feel it in your face, too, the same flush you get from sitting too close to a fireplace. In the quiet between conversations, you notice how the cooking fire behaves differently than a low, overnight burn. It's brighter, snapping occasionally, sending out more radiant heat. Even those on the outer edge of the teepee are shifting their robes aside a little, letting the air reach them directly. Once the meal is done, the pot is moved off to the side, and the fire is allowed to sink back into a steadier, smaller flame. But the lodge stays warm longer than usual, the stones around the hearth still holding the extra heat from the evening's cooking. It's an elegant example of efficiency, two essential needs met at once, with no extra fuel wasted. As you wrap yourself in your robe again, the lingering aroma of the stew mixes with the steady warmth, and you realize that tonight's comfort didn't come from the fire alone. It came from the act of sharing food, from the heat of the pot and the closeness of people, all woven together into a single, sustaining memory. Later that night, you feel a shift in weight at your feet. It's subtle at first, a slight pressure, then the unmistakable warmth of something alive curling into place. You glance down and catch sight of a dog settling itself across the end of your bedding, its fur thick and dusted with snowflakes that melt quickly in the tipi's heat. It exhales once, a deep, contented huff, and goes still. In winter lodges across the plains, animals, especially dogs, were more than helpers or hunters. They were living heat sources. Their body warmth was reliable, renewable, and generously given without coaxing. Historical accounts describe families welcoming their dogs inside on the coldest nights, allowing them to sleep at the foot of the bedding or between layers of robes. Some even had favored spots, returning to the same place night after night as if claiming their own bed. This practice wasn't born out of sentimentality alone. A medium-sized dog can keep the temperature around its body several degrees warmer, which in the frigid hours before dawn could make a critical difference. You imagine this arrangement working both ways. The dog gains the benefit of the fire's heat, and you gain the cushion of its own. You shift your feet slightly under your robe and feel the warmth seep upward from where the animal lies. The dog stirs but doesn't move away, adjusting itself so its flank presses more firmly against your legs. The comfort is immediate, like someone placing a hot water bottle under the covers. Elders have spoken of how dogs often learned instinctively to choose the coldest nights for this closeness. They'd curl tighter, tuck noses under tails, and fit themselves into the crook of a sleeper's body without disturbing them. In return, they'd wake in the morning with frost-free fur, ready to work or guard the camp. Scholars of indigenous lifeways have occasionally debated whether the relationship with dogs in winter was primarily practical or also deeply symbolic. There's evidence for both. Dogs were seen as part of the household, sharing in the same warmth, food, and protection as humans. In return, they offered more than labor. They offered presence, a reminder that survival was a shared effort. You watch another dog pad quietly around the fire, circling twice before dropping down beside a child's bedding. The child shifts in their sleep, nestling closer. The dog stays alert for a moment, ears twitching toward the sound of wind at the door flap, before settling its head on its paws. The Tipi holds a deeper quiet when animals are part of it, their breathing folding into the rhythm of human breaths. The warmth they provide is subtle, not the rush of heat from a fire, but the steady, living kind that you notice only when it's gone. You let your own breathing match the dog's at your feet, the shared heat easing you further into rest. Out beyond the hides, the prairie night stretches cold and unbroken. But here, under layers of fur, some living, some long-tanned, you're part of a circle of warmth that doesn't end with people alone. By the next afternoon, you notice something unusual outside the lodge, an extra wall of hides and brush standing a short distance from the tipi. At first glance, it looks like a second shelter, but when you step out to inspect, you realize it's not for living in at all. It's a windbreak, positioned just far enough away to catch the prevailing gusts before they ever reach the tipi's own walls. Winter wind on the plains doesn't just chill, it scours. It slides through gaps, pushes at seams, and steals heat with relentless persistence. By creating an outer barrier, the people here give the tipi a calmer pocket of air to exist in, reducing the strain on its own covering. This means less draft through the lower edges and a more stable interior temperature. Accounts from 19th century observers sometimes mention these secondary structures, though they often underestimated their importance. They weren't always elaborate, sometimes just a row of stacked brush, driftwood, or snow-packed walls, but the effect was profound. Even a partial block could mean the difference between a cozy night and one spent fighting constant cold air creeping in. The windbreak in front of you has been built with care. The base is a low mound of snow, patted hard and smooth to resist erosion. Against it, layers of willow branches are woven together, then reinforced with hide panels that have seen too many seasons to serve as tipi walls but still hold against the wind. The whole thing curves slightly, echoing the arc of the tipi behind it, so gusts are funneled away instead of trapped. There's a practical rhythm to how this would have been set up. First, the camp is placed in a naturally sheltered spot like the hollow you've already seen. Then, for extra insurance against a bitter season, these man-made windbreaks are added to Tipis most exposed to gusts. It's a layered defense, with the land, the barrier, and the lodge itself all working together. Some elders say that in heavy storms, snow would be deliberately piled higher against these outer walls, making them even more efficient. Others recall temporary windbreaks thrown together from saddle blankets or dismantled sled frames when the weather turned suddenly. Flexibility mattered just as much as durability. You step behind the barrier and feel the immediate difference. Wind noise drops, your hair stops whipping across your face, and the air feels less biting. Standing between it and the tipi feels like being in a quiet hallway compared to the open plain. From an anthropological point of view, these structures also reveal how nothing went to waste. Worn hides, broken poles, and leftover brush were never discarded if they could be reassembled into something useful. In a winter camp, every resource found a second or third life before it was truly done. As you step back inside the lodge, you notice how the entrance flap barely stirs despite the wind you heard moments ago. The barrier outside is holding, letting the people inside enjoy a steadier, more even heat. It's one more example of how survival here isn't a single solution. It's a whole web of them, woven together until even the wind itself loses some of its teeth. That night, as the fire settles into a low glow, you notice no one is in a hurry to strip down for bed. Instead, people are loosening belts, shrugging off only their outermost layers, and then pulling their sleeping robes right over the clothes they've worn all day. It's a layering strategy, one that keeps heat where it matters and avoids exposing skin to the cold air inside, even if the lodge is warmer than outside. For winter living on the plains, layers were not just about daytime travel, they extended into the night. Cotton and wool were rare in earlier times, so people relied on buckskin shirts, leggings, and robes made from animal hides. Each layer had a purpose. The innermost absorbed moisture and kept skin dry. The middle layers trapped air, creating insulation. The outer robe or hide held the warmth in, acting like the walls of the tipi in miniature. Travel writers occasionally express surprise that people here didn't change into a separate, sleeping outfit. But when you think about it, removing warm clothing in sub-zero conditions even for a few minutes would be a recipe for a dangerous chill. By sleeping in layers, the warmth built up through the day is carried straight into the night. You shift under your own coverings and feel the difference. The robe over your layered clothing creates a snug, almost sealed environment, and your own body heat builds up quickly. There's no shock of cold on bare skin, no rush of icy air slipping into the folds. Stories from elders sometimes describe how winter clothing was adapted for sleeping leggings, loosened for comfort, shirts untied at the neck to make breathing easier, but otherwise left in place. This way, if someone needed to step outside in the middle of the night, whether to fetch water, check the animals, or tend the fire, they could do it without a frantic scramble to get dressed. Anthropologists have noted that this habit also extended the life of sleeping robes. With an insulating layer between skin and fur, less body oil transferred to the hides, keeping them softer and less prone to stiffening over time. You watch as others in the lodge settle in. One man wraps his head and neck with a spare scarf before lying down, while a woman near the wall adjusts her leggings so the fur lining faces inward. The children are already bundled, their faces barely peeking out from the folds. No one is shivering, and no one seems to think about the cold outside. It's simply not invited in. The fire pops softly, and the air in the tipi is comfortable enough that you could almost forget it's winter until a gust outside rattles the hides, a reminder of the world beyond. You pull your layers a little tighter, knowing that even if the fire dims before morning, the warmth you've built will stay with you. In this place, clothing isn't just what you wear, it's part of the architecture of survival. Before dawn, you notice a faint orange halo glowing under the embers. The fire seems almost asleep, yet it's alive enough to catch with just a little coaxing. A man rises quietly, crouches beside the hearth, and brushes away a thin layer of ash, revealing the heart of the heat coals banked carefully the night before. This is not a chance occurrence. Banking the fire is a practiced skill, part of the nightly rhythm in a winter tipi. Instead of letting the flames burn out completely, the fuel is allowed to collapse into glowing embers, which are then covered with ash to slow their oxygen intake. This blanket of ash works like an insulator, holding heat deep inside without letting it escape too quickly. The result is a bed of coals that can last for hours without attention. Ethnographic notes from the early 20th century describe how this practice saved enormous amounts of time and effort. Without banked embers, starting a new fire on a frigid morning meant venturing outside to gather kindling, striking sparks, and blowing on them until flames caught a process that could be slow and miserable when your fingers were numb. With banked coals, you simply uncovered them, fed them small twigs, and within minutes the lodge was warm again. The man at the hearth works with minimal movement. He stirs the embers just enough to let them breathe, then lays a few sticks across them. The wood catches with a small hiss, and in moments, the tipi begins to fill with a new, gentle heat. The rest of the sleepers remain undisturbed. The process is quiet, almost invisible. Some elders recall teaching children how to bank a fire as soon as they were trusted with tending it, stressing the importance of not smothering the embers entirely. Too much ash, and they'd go cold. Too little, and they'd flare up during the night, wasting fuel and creating excess smoke. Archaeologists examining old campfire sites have found ash deposits that suggest this same technique was used for centuries. It's one of those understated technologies, no tools beyond a stick and a steady hand, yet it kept countless winter mornings from starting in the freezing dark. As the fire grows, The Tipi's walls take on a warmer hue, and the air shifts from cool to comfortably mild. You feel the change from where you're lying, a slow creep of warmth along your robe and into your bones. By the time the rest of the household stirs, the lodge will already be welcoming, the night's cold held at the door. It strikes you that banking the fire is less about convenience and more about continuity. The flame you see now is a direct descendant of last night's flame, a chain of heat stretching back night after night, as long as the camp has stood here. In a place where survival is a balance between vigilance and rest, that unbroken line of warmth is as reassuring as any wall or roof. As the sun edges higher over the horizon, you hear talk in the lodge about the coming days. The wind has shifted, carrying a sharper edge, and people are already thinking about whether to move camp. It's not a casual conversation on the plains. The decision to relocate in winter could mean the difference between steady comfort and a battle with the elements. The seasonal movement of camp was a finely tuned pattern. Winter sites were often chosen in sheltered river valleys or wooded draws, where the land itself provided windbreaks and easy access to fuel. But if the weather turned or the game moved, the entire village could shift to a new site, even in deep snow. This wasn't just wanderlust, it was part of the survival plan, a response to both climate and resources. You picture the process described in oral histories: poles and hides carefully dismantled, bundled, and loaded onto sleds or travois pulled by horses or dogs. The fire's embers would be saved, carried in a covered container so that the next camp's hearth could be lit from the same flame. People would leave at first light and arrive before dusk, giving just enough time to repitch the lodges before the cold clamped down again. The route wasn't chosen at random. Scouts would go ahead, reading the snow for drifts, checking for frozen waterways that could be crossed, and listening to the wind's voice in the trees. A shift of just a few miles could make an enormous difference in how much the wind punished the camp at night. Some historians point out that these moves weren't always about escaping bad weather. Sometimes they were to position the camp closer to herds, water, or trading partners. But whatever the reason, the result was the same. A teepee placed in a better spot was easier to heat and easier to keep warm through the night. In the tipi now, you hear one man mention a stand of evergreens. He saw a day's ride away, their dense branches heavy with snow. The way he says it, you can tell he's thinking about both fuel and shelter. Another woman wonders aloud about a bend in the river that might block the north wind. No one speaks in terms of if, only when. The move will happen. The question is timing. You realize that mobility is part of the architecture of warmth here. The tipi isn't just insulated, it's portable by design. A house that can chase better conditions when staying put no longer makes sense. It's a reminder that survival isn't about building walls thick enough to endure anything. It's about knowing when and how to change your surroundings. Later, as the wind presses harder against the hides, you think about how modern life has dulled that instinct. Most people today are bound to fixed walls, enduring bad weather where they are. Here, the walls themselves are ready to walk if the land stops offering protection. It's a flexibility that turns the entire prairie into a potential hearth. As the pale morning light filters through the smoke-darkened hides, the tipi hums with low conversation. The fire has been refreshed, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that slip neatly through the vent above. But the talk isn't about breakfast or chores. It's about the wind. It came from the northwest last night, biting harder than before. And even now you can hear it combing the prairie grass outside with a hiss that rises and falls like breath. That change in direction is enough to set minds turning toward the possibility of moving camp. Out here, the decision to relocate in winter is never taken lightly, but it is always on the table. It's not simply about comfort, it's about stacking the odds in favor of survival. Winter lodges, for all their efficiency, rely on more than just design, they depend on location. If the wind starts tunneling into the camp, if the game herds shift too far, if firewood grows scarce, the people move. In the warmth of the lodge, you listen as the conversation weaves through practicalities. An older man recalls a winter decades ago when they stayed too long in one valley, and a sudden freeze turned the river into a slab of ice so thick they couldn't break through for water. Another voice speaks of a time they moved just 2 miles into a more sheltered stand of cottonwoods, and the difference in the night's warmth was like stepping from winter into early spring. The seasonal cycle here is deliberate. In the late fall, camps often settle in places shielded by hills, trees, or riverbanks, where the prevailing winds are broken before they reach the lodges. The water is close, and so is the wood supply. But these spots aren't permanent fortresses, they're way stations. If storms grind too hard from the same direction for too many days, or if hunting parties return empty-handed more than once, the order to move can come swiftly. You picture the process as described in countless oral histories. Before first light, people stripping the lodge of its hides, folding them into thick bundles, tying each with rawhide thongs. The long poles are gathered into neat stacks, some lashed together into a frame for the travois, those triangular sleds pulled by horses or dogs. Bedding and supplies are packed in a way that keeps them accessible, for no one wants to unroll everything at night only to repack at dawn. The fire itself is never left behind entirely. From beneath its ashes, the hottest embers are wrapped in thick, dampened bark or tucked into a container, lined with ashes and carried along. This is more than convenience, it's a form of continuity. Lighting the new camp's fire from the old is like linking one hearth to another, maintaining an unbroken chain of warmth across the landscape. Moving a camp in winter is as much about reading the land as it is about endurance. Scouts travel ahead, scanning for signs, snowdrifts banked too high for the horses, frozen streams that could either be crossed easily or crack dangerously under weight, and, most importantly, the patterns of the wind. Sometimes they press their ears to the trunks of trees to listen for the hum of air in the branches, a sound that tells them which valleys will be quieter, which slopes will be punishing. There's a strategic element too. Proximity to game is a constant consideration. If the herds have shifted south, the camp may follow, even if it means giving up a snug hollow for a more exposed spot. Shelter is important, but so is food, and hunger will undo warmth faster than any draft. Inside the lodge, the discussion keeps its easy rhythm, but there's an undercurrent of readiness. One woman mentions a cluster of evergreens she saw beyond a low ridge, where the snow lies deep but undisturbed. Another suggests a bend in the river that might turn the northwest wind. The responses are thoughtful, not hurried. This isn't panic, but preparation. Some anthropologists have pointed out that mobility was built into every part of life here, right down to the architecture. The Tipi's conical frame isn't just stable, it's quick to assemble and disassemble. Every pole, every thong, every hide is part of a system meant to move when the land says move. Staying in one place too long, especially in winter, runs counter to the very logic of the design. You imagine the shift itself. A file of horses and dogs pulling loads across the white expanse, the old camp melting back into the prairie behind them, leaving only faint impressions in the snow. By dusk, the poles are rising again in a new hollow, hides stretched tight, smoke curling up into a new patch of sky. The same bedding is unrolled, the same robes drawn up around shoulders, but the air feels different, less punishing, more still. It dawns on you that warmth here is not just about what happens inside the walls of a lodge, it's about knowing when those walls need to be somewhere else entirely. Adaptation is as much a heat source as the fire, and mobility is the wick that keeps it burning. In a fixed house, you hunker down and endure. In a tipi, you listen to the wind, read the snow, and let the whole home walk toward better odds. By the time the move is decided, the sky has shifted into the heavy grey that warns of more snow. Out beyond the circle of Tipis, you notice how drifts have already gathered against the windbreaks and at the base of the lodges. At first, you think of them as a nuisance, barriers you'd have to dig away, but then you remember something you heard earlier in the season. Snow, when used wisely, can keep a lodge warmer. It's a truth that feels counterintuitive. How can frozen water protect against freezing air? But the snow's structure traps air within its crystals, creating a barrier much like the fur on a hide or the fibers in a wool blanket. In the right conditions, that layer of packed snow along the lower walls of the teepee works as an insulator, sealing the gap between ground and hide where drafts most often sneak in. You watch as a pair of young men step outside with wooden shovels, pushing snow toward the base of a neighboring lodge. They pack it firmly, walking in circles to stomp it down, and smooth the surface so the wind will slide past instead of tearing pieces loose. The work is rhythmic, almost meditative, and the difference it will make inside is immediate. Travelers who visited winter camps in the 1802 sometimes mentioned this practice, though a few misunderstood it as simple tidiness or an effort to anchor the lodge in storms. In reality, it was both functional and adaptable. If the weather warmed unexpectedly, the snow could be scraped away to let the tipi breathe again. If the temperature dropped, more could be added until the lower wall was encased like the foundation of a snow fort. One elder once explained that snow was the winter's gift to the builder, free, abundant, and perfectly suited to the task. When fresh snow fell, children were sometimes sent to gather clean drifts for filling small gaps, turning the chore into a game. The base of the tipi would soon look as if it had grown out of the ground itself, white merging into tan hide. There's also a certain quietness that comes with snow-packed walls. You've already felt how the hides muffle the outside world, but with snow against them, the effect deepens. The sharp whine of the wind dulls to a muted hum, and even footsteps outside sound more distant. It creates a sense of stillness that's as much psychological comfort as it is physical protection. Archaeologists studying old winter sites have found traces of this technique in the form of soil discoloration and packed earth patterns where snow once sat, preserving outlines of lodges long after the season ended. That kind of evidence speaks to how widespread and long-standing the practice was across the plains. As you duck back into the lodge, you feel the difference almost instantly. The air near the floor is calmer, no small eddies of cold sliding in under the hides. The fire's warmth lingers longer between tending, and even your feet seem less eager to burrow deeper under the robes. The snow outside will keep falling through the night, layering itself over the work that's just been done. By morning, the base of the tipi will be buried deeper, the seal even stronger. In most places, a heavy snow is something to endure. Here, it becomes part of the architecture, another wall in the defense against the endless cold. That evening, after the snowbank has been smoothed and the fire tended, you notice a different kind of warmth settling in, not just the physical kind, but something you can feel in the way people speak to each other, the way laughter rolls quietly around the circle. It's a reminder that survival here is never only about materials and techniques. It's also about spirit, about keeping the mind steady and the heart light when the cold presses hardest. Storytelling begins without ceremony. Someone clears their throat, shifts on their bedding, and starts weaving a tale, part history, part humor, part gentle lesson. The children lean forward, their faces lit orange by the fire, while the adults smile in the shadows. The story drifts between real events and the kind of exaggerations that make the room stir with laughter. A hunter's horse suddenly becomes faster than the wind. A snowstorm grows so huge it swallows the moon whole. Early ethnographers sometimes noted this evening ritual, though they often treated it as entertainment rather than the essential tool it was. A good story could warm the mood, distract from hunger, and carry the mind away from the relentless sound of the wind outside. In a space where the physical cold was always a threat, keeping morale high was as important as sealing the smoke hole or banking the fire. You realize how this works in practice. When laughter passes around the lodge, shoulders relax, people shift closer without thinking, and the whole circle feels a little tighter. That closeness alone adds to the shared warmth, the kind you can't measure with a thermometer. Some elders say winter was when the mind grew sharpest, because with less work to do outside, more time was spent learning, remembering, and imagining. Children would hear the same stories dozens of times, and each telling was a thread in the larger fabric of who they were. The tales carried instructions how to read a snowdrift, how to follow a herd without leaving tracks, but they also carried encouragement, reminding everyone that storms end, seasons turn, and warmth always returns. Anthropologists have debated how much of this winter storytelling was meant for children and how much for the adults. Sitting here now, you see that it doesn't matter. Everyone listens. Everyone laughs at the same punchlines and feels the same small lift when a hero in the story finds their way home through the snow. Outside, the wind continues to push against the Tipi walls, but its voice is distant, muffled by hides, snow, and the ripple of conversation. Inside, the air feels almost festive. A pot of tea passes from hand to hand. Someone unwraps a bundle of dried berries to share. Even the dogs near the doorway seem to settle deeper into their spots, lulled by the rhythm of human voices. It strikes you that this atmosphere isn't accidental. The warmth of spirit is cultivated here, as carefully as the fire itself. A teepee in winter is more than a shelter. It's a place where stories knit people together until they're as much a source of heat as the coals in the hearth. And tonight, that warmth is enough to push the cold entirely out of your mind. By morning, the air inside the lodge carries a faint scent of frost from where the door flap was lifted during the early chores. Outside, the wind is still restless, but the tipi holds steady. You're reminded again that its most remarkable feature isn't just warmth, it's mobility. This is a house designed to move with its people, to fold itself into bundles and travel when the land demands it. You watch as a few men step outside to check the poles. They tilt their heads back, scanning the bindings where the long lodge poles cross high above. Even after days of strong wind, nothing has loosened. The poles themselves are chosen for both strength and flexibility, usually lodgepole pine or similar, long enough to form the frame without bending under the hide's weight. The fact that these same poles can be lifted, stacked, and hauled to a new site is part of what makes the teepee so well suited to this land. Accounts from early military scouts and traders noted, sometimes with grudging respect, how quickly an entire village could vanish from one place and reappear in another. They described watching as a camp of dozens of tipis came down in less than an hour, each reduced to neat bundles lashed to dogs or horses. The design wasn't an afterthought, it was part of the living strategy that made survival possible. In the deep cold, portability becomes more than convenience. If firewood grows scarce, or the snow drifts high enough to block paths, or the herds move, the teepee's strength lies in its readiness to go. Staying put when resources run out means losing the battle with the season. Moving means staying ahead of it. Some elders tell stories about how a family could pack its home so efficiently that every piece had its place. Hides folded into the center to protect them, poles aligned in order of length, lashings coiled and ready. Children help too, rolling up bedding and tucking smaller items into the folds of the hides. This wasn't chaos, it was a choreographed dance, honed by practice until the camp could transform itself in a morning. Scholars who study indigenous architecture have pointed out that this mobility is a kind of freedom unknown to most settled dwellers. Your shelter is not a fixed thing, it's a partner that follows you, adapting to new wind patterns, new food sources, new dangers. It's a system where architecture and lifestyle are inseparable. Sitting here now, you imagine how that would feel in your own life. If the weather turned against you, you wouldn't be stuck in walls that trap the cold along with you. Instead, you could take your shelter with you, finding a new hollow in the land where the wind passes more gently and the cold doesn't bite so deep. The thought is strangely comforting. A teepee in winter isn't just about staying warm where you are, it's about knowing that warmth can be pursued, that the hearth can travel. In a world where the elements hold such power, that ability might be the most important survival skill of all. Later in the day, you notice a quiet flow of movement between lodges. People slip in and out with bundles in their arms, extra hides, small sacks of dried meat, and even armfuls of firewood. At first, it seems like routine visiting, but then you realize what's happening. Families are pooling resources to help those who might not have enough to get through the next stretch of weather. In a winter camp, generosity isn't a gesture, it's infrastructure. The survival of one lodge is tied to the well-being of all. If a fire goes cold in one tipi, or if someone runs low on wood, the chill can spread in more ways than one. Cold makes people ill. Illness slows work, and soon the weight of the season becomes heavier for everyone. Sharing hides, fuel, and food is a form of insurance against that spiral. Historical accounts often missed the scale of this cooperation. Visitors saw the exchange of goods, but didn't always grasp that these weren't trades in the marketplace sense. They were acts woven into the fabric of daily life. A thick buffalo robe moved from one family to another when a newborn arrived. A bundle of kindling was dropped discreetly by a neighbor's entrance when they'd been sick for days. No debts, no ledgers, just the understanding that the gesture would be returned, whether tomorrow or years from now. There are stories told around winter fires of times when the entire camp shifted their sleeping arrangements to make space for a struggling household, moving people closer together in the warmest tipis and layering every available hide over them until the danger passed. In those moments, distinctions between my home and yours blurred. Some anthropologists have pointed out that this mutual aid extended beyond physical goods. Skills were shared too. A man adept at adjusting smoke flaps might make the rounds to check them all before a storm, while an experienced fire tender might bank embers for a neighbor who was away on a hunt. Even small tasks, multiplied across a camp, could mean the difference between enduring a cold snap and suffering through it. As you sit near the fire, a woman enters carrying a folded hide. She places it on the ground beside the hearth, explaining softly that it's for another lodge where a child has been coughing at night. Within minutes, 2 more people arrive, with offerings, dried berries, strips of smoked meat, each item set aside for the same household. No one makes a speech about it. No one seems to think it unusual. You realize that this network of quiet exchanges is as important as the hides overhead or the fire between you. Warmth here isn't just the product of fur and flame, it's a collective effort, sustained by people who understand that in the face of the prairie's winter, no one stands alone. Outside, the wind sharpens again, tapping at the hides as if to remind you that it's still waiting. Inside, the act of sharing creates a warmth that feels deeper than heat alone. It's a warmth of connection, of knowing that if your own fire ever burned low, someone would be at your door before the cold could take hold. That night, as the fire dims to a steady bed of coals, you notice one of the women in the lodge cradling a bundle far larger than you'd expect for a child. She lays it down beside her bedding and unwraps it to reveal an intricate arrangement of hides, furs, and soft cloth. Inside, a small boy sleeps so deeply you can barely see his breath moving the fur near his mouth. He's wrapped like a treasure, layer upon layer, until not a single wisp of cold air could possibly reach him. Caring for children in winter here is a science as much as it is an act of love. The layers closest to the skin are soft and breathable, often made from tanned deer hide or other supple materials that keep moisture away. Over that comes fur, rabbit, beaver, or the plush underside of buffalo hides, pulled snug without being tight. Then there's the outer layer, thick enough to shield from any stray draft. The whole bundle is light enough to lift, but heavy enough to hold the day's warmth well into the night. Observers in the 1802nd occasionally mentioned seeing children so well wrapped they resembled small parcels, carried from one lodge to another without ever being exposed to the air. They didn't always realize how deliberate every fold and tie was. The wrapping isn't simply about heat, it's about keeping the child's temperature steady, avoiding the dangerous fluctuations that make little bodies more vulnerable to illness. You watch as the woman tucks a strip of fur gently around the boy's head, leaving his face uncovered so the air he breathes stays fresh. The rest of his body is encased in a cocoon so warm that, even without the central fire, he'd be safe for hours. Beside him, another child sleeps under a shared robe with an older sibling, the two of them pressed close enough that their breathing seems to match. Some elders recall that during especially bitter nights, children might be placed in the very center of the lodge, closest to the fire's residual heat, with adults forming a living wall around them. Others describe special child-sized robes, so perfectly fitted that they were handed down through generations and still carried the faint smoke scent of decades past. Anthropologists have discussed whether these careful wrappings were more effective than cradling children directly against the body for warmth. The truth is, both methods were used bundling for long, steady sleep and body contact for quick warming if a child came in from the cold. The two worked together, just as every other survival method here fits into a wider pattern. As the firelight flickers, you notice how the woman checks the boy's wrapping without waking him, running her hand lightly over the outer layer to ensure no gaps have opened. It's a silent skill, the kind passed down not by instruction manuals but by years of watching, helping, and eventually doing. Outside, the wind combs through the snowbanks, but here in the lodge, the boy sleeps on, safe in his layered world. You realize that in this place, warmth for the youngest isn't left to chance. It's crafted with the same care given to the teepee's walls, the fire's coals, and the hands that keep both alive. By midday, the lodge fills with the smell of something rich and heavy fat sizzling in a pot over the fire. At first, you think it's just another meal being prepared, but then you hear someone mention how important this kind of food is in the cold months. Out here, the diet shifts with the season, and in winter, meals are built not just for taste but to feed the body's internal furnace. High-fat, high-protein foods become the fuel that keeps people warm long after the fire dies down. Buffalo meat, marrow from split bones, rendered fat mixed with dried berries into pemmican, these are staples. They're dense with energy, slow to digest, and perfect for sustaining body heat through long, freezing nights. Even the hot broth that accompanies meals is more than comfort. It replenishes fluids lost to the dry winter air and warms from the inside out. Early explorers often remarked on the amount of fat eaten during winter in the plains, sometimes with surprise, but they didn't always understand the science behind it. A body burning calories to maintain warmth needs far more fuel than in summer, and fat is the most efficient source. Eating lean meat alone for too long in extreme cold could actually make a person weaker, a truth well understood here long before anyone wrote it in a journal. You watch as the cook spoons a ladle of thick stew into a wooden bowl, chunks of meat glistening in a rich surface sheen. She passes it to an elder, who blows on it once before taking a slow sip. Across the fire, a younger man works a knife into a length of marrow bone, tapping it lightly until the center slides free into his hand. He drops it into the pot, where it melts into the broth, adding both flavor and the vital fat the meal needs. There are small rituals around these foods, too. In some households, the first marrow is offered to children or elders. In others, the cook saves a particular piece for the person who hunted the animal. It's nourishment wrapped in gratitude, a reminder of the chain of effort that brought it to the fire. Some scholars have debated whether the high-fat diet was strictly about survival, or if it was also tied to taste and tradition. But sitting here, warmed not only by the fire but by the richness of the stew in your belly, it's clear those distinctions don't matter much. The food is doing its job, and in a place where the cold never truly rests, that's what counts. After you finish eating, the warmth lingers, not just in your stomach but in your fingers and toes. The robe around your shoulders feels heavier in a good way, the air in the lodge softer and more forgiving. You realize this isn't just about staying alive, it's about living in a way that makes the long winter not just bearable, but strong. The next time you step outside, the air is so cold it bites the inside of your nose. But something else catches your attention. A faint, sweet, smoky scent clinging to the Tipi walls. You run your fingers along the outer hide and realize it's been treated. The surface is darker than untreated leather, and the smell reminds you of the hearth inside. This isn't just the residue of living around a fire. It's the result of a deliberate process that makes the hide both more durable and more resistant to the hazards of an open flame. Smoke curing the hides does more than add a rich, earthy color. The process infuses the leather with compounds that slow moisture absorption, help repel insects, and most importantly, reduce the risk of embers burning holes straight through. The hides are suspended over a low, smoldering fire, often fueled by specific woods or grasses chosen for the character of their smoke, and left there long enough for the vapors to work deep into the fibers. When done right, The result is a covering that lasts far longer and resists stiffening in freezing weather. Traders' journals from the 19th century sometimes describe these smoke-treating sessions in winter camps, noting how whole families would take part. One person tended the smoke pit, another adjusted the hides to ensure even exposure, and others worked rawhide thongs through grommets to keep the panels from warping. In colder months, this work was sometimes done inside a larger lodge or under temporary shelters to keep the process steady despite wind or snow. You can imagine why this mattered. In deep winter, a spark popping from the central fire and landing on a dry, untreated hide could mean disaster. But with smoke-cured hides, the ember might leave only a faint mark rather than a growing hole. Over time, the hides also developed a kind of weatherproof skin, better able to shrug off melting snow or light rain that might otherwise freeze hard in place. Some historians have discussed whether the curing was purely practical or if it also carried ceremonial meaning, especially when certain plants or aromatic woods were used to create the smoke. There are stories from elders about using sage or sweetgrass not only for their preservative qualities but to imbue the lodge with a protective spirit. In that light, the treatment becomes both shield and blessing. Back inside, you look up at the sloping walls and realize that every inch of that surface has been handled, inspected, and cared for by someone in the camp. The hides are not inert. They're living parts of the lodge's history, each bearing the memory of hunts, hands, and winters past. You press your palm lightly to the wall and feel the faint give beneath it, the warmth it keeps in, and the wind it keeps out. The scent lingers on your skin after you pull your hand away, a reminder that in this place, even the smell of the air is part of the shelter. That smoke is not just from today's fire, it's woven into the very fabric of the home, as much a part of the tipi as the poles that hold it up. Night falls under a pale, full moon, and while the lodge settles into its quiet rhythm, you catch the soft crunch of footsteps outside. A moment later, the door flap lifts and a man slips in, brushing snow from his shoulders. He's one of the night watchers, a role as much about warmth as it is about security. In winter camps, the night was never left entirely unattended. Someone was always awake, moving between lodges, keeping an eye on the firelight that should be visible through the smoke hole, listening for changes in the wind, and watching for any signs of trouble. These rounds weren't done in stiff, military precision, but in a calm, steady circuit, with each watcher carrying their own set of small duties. He kneels by the fire without a word, adding a few sticks and coaxing the embers into livelier flames. The heat begins to spread again, the tipi breathing more easily. In the corner, a dog raises its head, ears twitching toward the entrance. The man gives it a small pat before moving to the next lodge, where another family will wake to a warmer hearth in the morning. Early accounts from fur traders often mention these watchers, though they tended to focus on their role as guards against raids or wild animals. What those accounts didn't always note is how important they were to maintaining the camp's warmth. A fire left too low for too long could let the interior temperature drop enough to wake the whole family, or worse, to let the cold creep into bedding where children slept. Some elders recall that on especially cold nights, watchers would pause longer at each lodge, using the quiet time to adjust a flap, check that a snowbank was still tight against the wall, or even add a piece of wood to a fire if someone inside was ill or very old. The act wasn't announced or expected, but it was valued deeply. There's ongoing discussion among historians about whether these night rounds were an assigned duty or simply a shared habit among light sleepers and early risers. The truth is likely a mixture, some nights planned, others spontaneous. What matters is that the work got done, and the cold was kept at bay by eyes and hands that refused to rest all at once. You think about how in most modern homes the temperature stays steady while the people sleep, the machinery running silently without human touch. Here, warmth is a living thing that must be looked after, even in the hours when dreams are deepest. The watchers are its guardians, tending not just to fires but to the invisible thread of safety that ties the whole camp together. The man's steps fade into the snow again, swallowed by the stillness outside. You can picture him moving through the silvered shapes of the other lodges, his breath pluming in the cold, his shadow gliding across the drifts. By the time he circles back, the fires will be steady, the wind guards firm, and the camp will still be sleeping, unaware of the quiet vigilance that has kept the cold from finding its way in. By the next afternoon, the wind has eased, and with it comes a lull in the constant battle against the cold. Inside the lodge, the atmosphere shifts, still purposeful, but with space for something slower. An elder begins to speak, not in the hurried cadence of giving instructions, but in the measured tone of teaching. The topic is winter itself, how to live with it, how to read it, and how to think about it as more than just an enemy. In many winter camps, these moments were as important as the physical work of keeping warm. Knowledge was passed down in the still hours, not through formal lectures, but in the kind of storytelling that feels like conversation. The elder speaks of how the wind can be read by its sound, how a high, thin whistle means cold will deepen by nightfall, while a low, steady hum suggests the weather will hold. He describes the way ice forms on different plants, and what it tells you about the air's moisture. Accounts from early missionaries and explorers often mention these lessons in passing, but they rarely caught the depth behind them. To outsiders, they were curiosities. To the people here, they were essential tools for survival mental warmth, to match the physical kind. You listen as the elder recalls a winter when the snow came early and stayed deep. Families survived not just because their tipis were tight and their fires steady, but because they knew when to hunt, when to stay sheltered, and when to move. He speaks of listening to the sound of distant herds moving across frozen ground, of watching the way ravens traveled on the wind to find food, of marking how frost clung to the hides of horses in the morning. Each detail is a thread, and together they weave a net that catches signs of what's to come. Some anthropologists debate whether these teachings were considered formal instruction or simply part of everyday conversation. Sitting here, it's clear there's no sharp line. The wisdom is layered into the rhythm of life, repeated until it's remembered not just by the mind, but by the hands and eyes that use it. The younger listeners lean in, asking questions about snowpack and whether certain birds still appear before storms. The elder answers patiently, sometimes with a wry smile, sometimes with the long pause of someone who wants the questioner to work it out for themselves. The fire crackles between sentences, a soft counterpoint to the lesson. In the stillness, you realize that part of what keeps people warm here is this readiness of mind. When you can read the signs, you can seal the hides tighter, gather more wood, pack food closer to the hearth. The warmth you feel at night starts in these daylight hours, in the ability to anticipate the cold before it comes. Outside, the light is already starting to fade, the pale sky turning toward the muted pink of winter dusk. Inside, the lesson ends not with ceremony, but with someone ladling out a pot of hot broth and passing it to the elder. The knowledge has been shared, the fire still burns, and for another night, both body and mind are well fed. As dusk deepens, a ripple of movement passes through the lodge. It's subtle at first, someone adjusts their bedding, another shifts the fire's wood, but soon you realize everyone is preparing for a sudden drop in temperature. No one says, "It's getting colder." They simply know. A faint change in the wind's pitch outside, the way the fire's smoke drifts lower before finding the vent, these are signals read instantly, prompting a quiet choreography of adjustments. First come the flaps. Two people rise, poles in hand, and tweak the smoke hole coverings so they angle more tightly against the breeze. Another adds a strip of hide along the bottom edge of the door flap, tucking it so no air can sneak in. Around the base of the lodge, a child packs a little extra snow into a spot where it's thinned, smoothing it with mittened hands before ducking back inside. Historical accounts sometimes describe these moments as tightening the lodge, though the term barely captures the variety of actions involved. Depending on the tribe, season, and conditions, it might mean adding extra robes to the walls, shifting the bedding circle closer to the fire, or even placing heated stones back under the hides before sleep. It's an instinctive, communal response. Everyone moves without needing to be told. One woman takes a heavy buffalo robe from a peg and drapes it over the shoulders of the elder nearest the wall. A man unrolls a narrow strip of hide and lays it over the ground gap between two bedding areas, blocking the cold air that had been curling up from beneath. In the corner, someone wraps their hands around a warmed stone, testing its heat before slipping it under a child's feet. Some researchers have debated whether these rapid adjustments were more about comfort or about preventing hypothermia. But here, the distinction doesn't seem to matter. The point is that no one waits for the cold to settle in before acting. The second the air changes, the lodge changes with it. You notice how quiet it all is. There's no flurry, no panic, just a steady rhythm of small actions. The fire grows a little brighter, the hides grow a little tighter, and the bedding feels a little heavier. The cumulative effect is dramatic. Within minutes, the air inside has stopped cooling and begun holding steady again. It strikes you that this is a form of resilience built into the daily fabric of life here. The cold may try to creep in at any time, but it's met by a kind of collective vigilance, honed by countless winters. Everyone's comfort depends on everyone's awareness. By the time the moon is high outside, the Tipi is once again its own contained world. The wind prowls and pushes at the walls, but nothing inside stirs except the steady, slow breathing of people who know they have done what's needed. Warmth here isn't a static condition, it's a living thing, adjusted and readjusted until it holds fast through the night. The blizzard arrives without warning in the early hours, not with a slow build, but as if the whole prairie suddenly decided to exhale ice. The wind slams against the tipi walls hard enough to make the poles hum, and the hide covering shudders in its lashings. Snow is everywhere at once, swirling through the smoke hole when the gusts shift, pressing in against the base, even slipping in through the smallest gaps at the door flap. Inside, no one panics. Movements are quick, but practiced. The fire is fed until the flames stand taller, their light sharp against the walls. Extra hides come down from their pegs and are doubled over the most exposed sections of the lodge. Bedding is pulled inward, tightening the sleeping circle, so everybody's warmth overlaps with the next. A heated stone is passed from hand to hand before being buried in the thick pile of furs at the center, where the youngest children lie. Accounts from winter camps describe blizzards as tests not only of the lodge's design, but of the people's coordination. The teepee's shape naturally deflects much of the wind, but in storms like this, the true strength lies in how quickly it can be fortified. Every person has a role, one to hold the door flap tight, one to keep the fire breathing without letting smoke fill the space, another to watch the lashings in case a pole needs tightening. Elders tell stories of blizzards that lasted days, when the fire never went out and every scrap of fuel was rationed to last as long as the storm. During those times, snow sometimes piled so high against the walls that the lodge was half buried, the snow itself becoming part of the insulation. The danger wasn't just the cold, it was the weight of the snow and the possibility of running out of dry wood before the skies cleared. In this moment, you can feel the storm's power in your bones. The wind howls in a dozen tones, each a different pitch depending on how it hits the lodge. It's a constant reminder that beyond these walls, the temperature is low enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. But inside, the fire's heat presses against your face, and the air smells of wood smoke and leather, grounding you in the safety of the space. Some anthropologists argue over whether these emergency measures tightening the lodge, adding layers, sharing heat were ever temporary or simply intensified versions of everyday winter habits. Watching them now, you see there's truth in both ideas. The skills used tonight are the same ones used every day, only sharper, faster, more deliberate when the stakes rise. Hours pass in the muffled glow of firelight and snow-muted sound. The storm still rages, but the lodge is holding. Even the dogs are calm, curled against the bedding, as if they trust the people to keep the warmth alive. And they're right to trust. Nothing here is left to chance. Every hide, every ember, every small adjustment is part of a web of actions that turns the teepee from a shelter into a fortress against the cold. By the second morning after the storm, the wind has lost its teeth. The teepee is half buried in drifts, its lower walls hidden beneath a smooth, glittering slope of snow. When the door flap is lifted, pale light floods in, along with a rush of air so still it feels almost heavy. The blizzard's roar has been replaced by the deep quiet that follows a snowfall, a silence broken only by the soft creak of packed snow settling. Inside, the fire burns low but steady, the air warmer than you expect after 2 days of siege. The snowbank that swallowed the lower walls has acted as an extra skin, holding in heat and muffling every sound. People move slowly, stretching limbs that have grown used to close quarters. The storm has passed, but the camp is in no hurry to spill back into the open. Winter still waits beyond the drifts, patient as ever. In the soft light, you notice something almost invisible, the calm on people's faces. They've done this before. They know that storms come and go, that preparedness is not a burden but a rhythm. They know that each night's warmth was built from dozens of small acts, banking coals, tightening lashings, passing a heated stone into a child's bedding, adjusting the smoke flaps by feel in the dark. Oral histories speak of winter survival not as a single skill, but as a legacy, a chain of knowledge handed from one generation to the next. The lodge you're sitting in holds not just the hides and poles of this season, but the memory of countless winters endured and overcome. Every crease in the hide, every patch in the lashings, is a record of storms weathered and lessons learned. Some researchers suggest that this accumulated experience, passed quietly in the daily work of living, is as important as the teepee's design itself. Without it, even the best-built lodge could fail. With it, even a modest one could keep its people safe. Sitting here, you understand why. The structure is only the frame. The true shelter is the knowledge woven into every choice, every movement, every shared task. When the door flap lifts again, the light is brighter, and a few voices call out from beyond the snowbank. The camp will soon dig paths, gather fresh wood, check on the animals. Life will resume its outward rhythm, but the inward rhythm, the vigilance, the adaptability, the constant tending of warmth will remain. You realize that surviving a winter here isn't about conquering the cold. It's about living alongside it, shaping your habits and your shelter until even the harshest nights become part of a cycle you know by heart. And in that understanding lies the deepest warmth of all. Now that the storm has eased and the camp breathes again, imagine the fire's glow softening until it's only a warm memory in the air. The hides above you no longer strain against the wind, but curve gently, holding in the last of the night's comfort. Outside, the snow lies unbroken, its surface catching the pale gold of a sun that's just beginning to climb. You let yourself sink deeper into the bedding, the furs molding around your shape, the scent of smoke and hide wrapping you in something older than words. The air is still cool enough to remind you it's winter, but it no longer bites, it rests against your skin like a steady hand. Around you, people move with the slow grace that comes when there's no urgency, only the day's simple tasks ahead. Somewhere nearby, the low murmur of voices rises and falls, carrying no hint of strain. Even the dogs, curled near the door, seem content to let the morning pass without haste. You close your eyes and feel the weight of the seasons settle in a way that no longer feels heavy. The cold is still out there, yes, but it's no longer a threat pressing at the door. It's part of the world, and so are you. You've learned how to hold your place against it, not by force, but by balance, heat and hide, ember and story, watchfulness and rest. In this quiet, you can almost hear the rhythm of it, the deep pulse of winter life in the lodge. And as the last tendrils of sleep curl at the edges of your mind, you know that this warmth, this shared, enduring warmth will carry you through every night until spring returns.